Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Council of Governors meeting, our July meeting. I'm Helen Phillips, and I'm the chair of the board of Chesterfield Royal Hospital, and as such, also chair of the Council of Governors. We've got a number of apologies today, not least of all because it's right in the middle of holiday season and also graduation season. Ian Ailes gives us apologies today. It's at his daughter's graduation, and we have apologies from colleagues on leave, namely Paul Scriven, Keith Nurcombe, Stephen Collis, Mark Coppell, Carol Warren, who's otherwise engaged, also Michelle Brown, Jack Woolley, Lawrence O'Connor-Reid, Jonathan Davies, Kate Caulfield and Deborah Watson. So all of those apologies are accepted and noted. Can I ask if there's any declarations of interest in respect of today's matters of business or any changes or updates to the register of interest, please? Hal.
Sorry, just before that, could I add Berenice's apologies, please, because of operational pressures. She's not going to be able to join us today for Council of Governors, so she just asked me to pass on her apologies.
Thank you very much. It also looks like I might have given Keith's apologies prematurely. Perhaps it was only to the earlier meeting. I see your hand is up and you're very much alive and well and with us, Keith.
I am, Helen, indeed, yes.
So apologies for that error. Norman.
Thank you, Helen. Just to inform you, I don't know if it's relevant, but I left the magistracy as a magistrate, but stayed on what we call the supplemental list. I'm now going back as an active magistrate into the family division to deal with the backlog of cases that they've got in that division, just family cases. So I've done my background checks. I've been accepted by the Lord Chancellor, and I'll be starting very soon back in court.
Very good. Well, that sounds like an important thing to volunteer to do, Norman, particularly with the pressures on the courts at the moment. So well done you, and we will update the register of interests accordingly.
Thank you.
So thank you for that. Now we're continuing to live stream these meetings so that members of the public can participate either in real time or subsequently by watching the recording. If there are any questions, there is a facility in the chat for you to raise them, and we will come back to them at the end of the meeting. We don't take questions as we go along from members of the public because it is a meeting in public rather than a public meeting, a subtle but important distinction. But that doesn't in any way diminish our appetite to hear from members of the public. So if you're dialed in and you've got questions, please do put them in the chat and we will come to them at the end of the meeting. Or if you're watching this, as the recording after the meeting, we will put details on about how it is you contact the Trust should you have any questions you want to raise with us or to contribute in any way. So that brings us on then to the first section and a group of papers which are all around the culture of the organisation. And the first item in that grouping is the Chief Exec's report. So please may we hand over to you, please, Hal, for the Chief Exec's report.
Thank you very much, Helen. Hopefully people have had a chance to read the Chief Exec's report, so I'm not going to go through all of it, but I'll try and draw out a couple of bits to highlight for people. I should start by highlighting the fact that on the 1st of July, the Integrated Care Board became the statutory body for the Derbyshire ICS. And sort of from the beginning, so it's been there in shadow form, but from the 1st of July, it has a legal basis. Foundation trusts such as ourselves still have a legal basis, and I think to some degree we're still working out the interaction between the two, but it's just for noting that really. And also, since we last met, the NHS had its 74th birthday, and we were pleased to recognise that with little cakes for all and sundry around the hospital, and that was nice to recognise that, and always conscious that lots of people at Chesterfield have worked there for really very many years. So one of the good things about the NHS is sometimes it does feel a bit like a family, and sometimes we squabble in families, but sometimes we're good at sticking together in that situation as well. Since we last met as well, there's been significant changes around COVID procedures in hospital. So just to highlight about that. So we went through a brief honeymoon period where we didn't have to wear masks around the hospital and where we weren't swabbing people. But as you know, towards the particularly peaking a couple of weeks ago, we had very rapidly increasing numbers of cases of patients with COVID in hospital. For kind of understanding, it's worth pointing out a couple of things about that whilst at one point we had over 100 patients in hospital with COVID, the vast majority of those weren't ill with COVID. So they were in hospital because of another problem, whether that be a heart attack or they'd fallen and broken their leg or whatever it was, but they had incidental COVID. In recent times, the only patients we've had on our intensive care units have been those that have been unvaccinated. So despite the anti-vax campaigns on the internet and all the rest of it, vaccination really does still make a difference to you. And so we need to keep repeating that message. The reason that the increased number of COVID cases was a problem was a lot around the logistics of us managing that, so that when a patient if a patient was coming into hospital without symptoms and we weren't testing them when they came in, and then they had COVID 3 days later and infected everyone else in the bay, that caused a lot of problems with managing our bed base and how we run the hospital from an operational point of view. And of course, at the back of our mind, we've very much got the importance of keeping our patients and our staff safe, because we don't want to be responsible for causing people to get COVID. Alongside that, we had very high levels of COVID staff absences. So our overall absences runs normally is about 5%. A couple of weeks ago, we were up to 10%, of which over half of that was directly attributable to COVID. Again, not necessarily that the staff were very sick with COVID, but they had COVID and therefore can't be coming into work. So as a result of all of those pressures, we took the decision to reinstate the compulsory, not legally enforceable, but compulsory wearing of masks within all areas of the hospital, as opposed to just in the clinical areas, which we've been doing before. And likewise, we took the decision that we were going to start swabbing or doing point of care testing on all patients that came in to the hospital, and that's continued at present. Although on the positive side, the COVID numbers are now just a bit below 100. I'm not sure. When I wrote the report, it was 101 and it was 88 yesterday, I think, but I'm not sure of today's figures, but it hopefully will have peaked. And I mention all of that really just so that people understand some of the thinking behind why we put back into place masks and swabbing. So moving on from that, the report talks about one of our favourite topics, which is smoking shelters, which I know we've talked about lots in the past. Hand on heart is not something that I really, as a doctor, want to be doing, but it is a kind of, we've got to the position before, as we've talked about, that we felt that we needed to try something different, and so that they're now in place. And there's lots of, any of you that have come into the hospital recently will see lots of big posters and signs kind of highlighting the dangers of smoking and trying to direct people to the shelters, and we'll have to see whether that works, I think, is the position we're at the moment. Moving on, operational pressures in the hospital. I mentioned a moment ago that Berenice isn't joining us. That's because the trust is on what's called OPAL 4 level. So OPAL is a kind of national level of about, takes into account lots of things, but about bed occupancy, about waits in ED, how many people are coming into hospital, the pressures on the hospital as a whole. We're on OPAL level 4 this morning, which is the highest level that we have. That it's based on national counting rather than our own internal assessment, if that makes sense. That just shows how challenged things still are in the hospital. We're still seeing very high numbers of patients coming into our emergency departments. Yesterday, particularly with the heat, we did have quite a lot of sort of elderly, frail patients coming into hospital who had become, dehydrated and were suffering the consequences of the heat. So it's just a reflection that normally in July we'd be thinking, this is our little, it's never a downtime in the hospital, but it's a little bit less pressured often in the summer, but it's not felt that way. And I remain very grateful and very appreciative of how hard all the staff are working and how they really, again and again, we ask them to go above and beyond, and again they respond. And, I want to recognise that, but also acknowledge that, I think we all worry in the hospital as to how long people can keep going. I had a catch up with the theatre matrons just yesterday, and one of the things that we've put in is we've put a lot of support. So theatres is one of the areas that was very pressured because a lot of their staff had to go and work in critical care during COVID, and it was quite a stressful environment and things. But the Donna and Steve, the theatre matrons, were telling me that nearly half of their theatre staff have accessed counselling that the hospital has been supporting and providing them with. So it's good that they feel able to access it. That's the positive thing. But it's also a reflection, I think, of how stressed and pressured some of the teams feel that more than half of the staff have been getting that help that's on offer. Related to the operational pressures, we're doing our absolute best about restore and recovery and trying to get back on track with, getting operations done, catching up with diagnostic tests and things. But obviously, it's always a challenge when we're having to open new areas and staffing is spread thinly. Having said that, we are doing well with that. We are a little bit ahead of schedule from the point of view of catching up on delayed operations and things. And again, credit to all the teams there that are working really, really hard to keep things going and do well. Royal Primary Care, I mentioned at the bottom of the report about that the CQC were visiting Royal Primary Care at the beginning of July for their inspection report. Very hot off the press because I only received it this morning. We've had the final report from that, and I'm pleased to say that shows that Royal Primary Care has been graded as good overall. So that's, of course, we'd like it to be outstanding, but being good is very solid, and I think we need to recognise all the hard work that Peter Scriven and Joe Lacey and all the teams in Royal Primary Care have done with that, because I think one of the things, I know one of the things that was highlighted by CQC was around the well-led and how good some of their processes were. In the spirit of openness and honesty, the thing that was highlighted was around patient access, which I know as a group we've talked about before. I know there's the Chief Exec's report talks about Doctor Link, which is a new system that's being put into. It's one of the things that we're trying to improve patient access, but it's one of those things that's going to take some time to resolve. And it was interesting, the CQC team said that when you put in new processes and improve access, often it's a couple of years before the patients really recognise that improved access because of perceptions and how long it takes to change those things. But as I say, positive news hot off the press just this morning. We've had the final report which says that CQC thought RPC West was good. So that's positive from our point of view. Car parking, I should mention, it's a hot topic still. We're talking about reintroducing car parking from I think September the 19th or with mid-September anyway, for both staff members and for visitors. This is in line with national guidance and is fundamentally, because otherwise we've got a shortfall in our finances if we don't do that. We're having lots of discussions with staff groups still, and the take-home message from me would always be we're charging people, staff groups, less than we were before COVID. So obviously people have had a nice period where they didn't get charged at all, and they like that, but we are charging less than before. And for people who are on the lower pay bands, so bands 1 and 2, because of the cost of living, we're not charging them at all. So we are trying to help people as much as we can as an organisation. And then I think the final thing I was just going to highlight was about DSFS. They had a National Estates and Facilities Day, sort of celebrating all of the good things that they do. I was talking to Dennis, our managing director, there the other day, and I was saying, well, in lots of ways, the best kind of recognition or credit to DSFS from my point of view is that I I'm not really aware of all of the things that are going on in the background that keeps the hospital running smoothly. And it's an absolutely vital, critical job that they're doing. But the fact that, you know, that the things happening and equipment in place and all of the teams are keeping things going is really a credit to DSFS and how well they're, you know, they do keep things running in the background. And I just wanted to recognise and thank them for that, because they're very much a part of our Chesterfield Royal Hospital team. So I'll end on that note. I'm happy to take any questions as best I can. So
thanks very much, Val. That's a great counter around matters at the Trust. There's a couple of items that arose in the Governor's pre-meeting that probably sit logically now rather than in the section we have in the agenda later for issues raised in the pre-meeting, because you've mentioned them in passing. So I'm just going to come back with those now, if I may, for a bit more input from you on some of them, and then we'll go to colleagues for any additional questions. So you mentioned the matters car parking. There's specific concern around car parking with regard to the level of damage to staff cars. Hardly a day goes by without somebody posting something on Facebook to say that their car has been damaged, and unfortunately there's been no message left. And I indicated that, you know, in reintroducing car parking charges, we're as much concerned about getting the right level of access, i.e. not people parking in the hospital and doing business elsewhere, and you know, reintroducing charges in the interest of making that happen, but also in the interest of having some better security measures in the longer term. So I think whatever comfort that can be offered to governors around that specific element of car parking would be very welcome. And we had another one on car parking, which is just a bit of a bugbear at the moment, that we've got these nice fancy boards that tell you how many spaces are left where, and I'm presuming they're in anticipation of our new recognition system. But governors have pointed out, in the absence of barriers, that's kind of jackanory at the moment. So you're told there's 110 spaces in car park 10, you go around there and you can't swing a cat. So are we indulging in misinformation in advance of having got the kind of full solution in place? So there were two specifics on car parking, if I may.
So I'll answer the first one about the security aspects of things. Is that, yes, it is a problem, and I'm aware that there's been quite a lot on Facebook, for example, about damage. We do have quite a number of areas that are covered by CCTV, but not every single area. One of the things about the number plate recognition is we will have a clearer record of which cars have been coming into which car parks. So part of putting this process back in place will be aligned to, or will be about trying to improve security. But I'll bring Steve Hebenstall in a moment, because he's our kind of car parking guru, if that makes sense. And certainly the question about what the reality of it, how many car parking spaces there are in the hospital, relative to what it says, is I honestly don't know the answer to. I should say, from a green agenda point of view, I get to the hospital under my own steam and I don't drive, so I'm kind of modelling net zero from the hospital's point of view. But Steve, did you want to come in and about those two things specifically?
Yeah, absolutely, Hal. So on the second point, I don't know is the honest answer, but we do have an implementation group that we've set up, so I'm happy to take that and feed that into that conversation. And I'm happy to get a response back to people on that, but I'm not sure how the signage bit of it will work, to be honest. In terms of the first point, you're absolutely right. It gives us a much better record of who's coming and going. I think it gives us better control of the flow around the site and clearer kind of designation around people where people should and shouldn't be parking. So I think it will certainly help from that perspective. again, the implementation group will be looking at the security aspect just to make sure we kind of implement the solution as well as possible, to make sure we kind of do everything we can to support that as well. So yeah, I think I'll take the second point away, and happy to get an answer back to people on that one if that's okay.
Thanks very much, Steve. That's great. And the other one I'd like to pick up from the pre-meet now, if I may, Hal, is about theatres, because you mentioned that you were down with theatre matrons, just reflecting on how tough it is down there. And there was a very good question about how are we going to increase theatre capacity. So I did talk about us being on the horns of a dilemma with regard to, we need to get a really good flow through theatres in order to meet our elective targets, in order to attach the premium that is implied in us being financially sustainable. And that is tricky in the absence of the availability of capital spend to make some of the investments in things like, ITU and HDU and beyond. And potentially even further complicated by virtue of other financial pressures that will be upon us soon. But we did say that we would come back to you to throw some more light on the whole issue of theatre capacity.
So I think there's two aspects to theatre capacity. One is internal productivity. So historically, our theatres have run at a sort of 70 or 75% internal productivity. It's theatre utilisation really is the word I should be using. As part of our plan, we have an aspiration to get to 85% utilisation, which without increasing numbers of people or numbers of theatre does increase theatre capacity. We've currently got up to about 78 or 79% on the last month, so we're making progress towards that. And the more progress we can make towards that, the better it is. But coming back to COVID a little earlier, one of our biggest challenges in theatre is around staff absence in the last month or so. And theatre absence is particularly high, and maybe part of that's related to the stresses and so on that they've gone through in the recent past. And that staff absence does mean that lists get cancelled sometimes, which impacts on our overall capacity if we've had to stand down a list because we haven't got enough ODPs or theatre nurses in order to support it, or indeed surgeons to support it. So that what we need to do internally is everything we can to try and improve that. And Steve, who's moving over from theatre matron to theatre manager, already has a very good knowledge of the working of our theatres, and hopefully we'll be able to progress that further. But it's very much an active bit of work within the surgical division. The theatre capacity bit, to an extent, as Helen's alluded to, we're between a rock and a hard place, because on the one hand, NHS England is telling us that we have to tighten our belts and not spend any more money, and on the other hand, NHS England is saying you need to throw money at waiting list initiatives and get, sort of aid the elective recovery. And speaking frankly, I think NHS England at the very highest level hasn't quite worked out in its head which of those two things they want us to do, because they're not necessarily mutually compatible. There are also within the Derbyshire ICS some additional things about increased theatre capacity. So in particular, there's a project called the Derbyshire Orthopaedic Centre, which we have national funding, capital funding, to be building a standalone elective theatre capacity, which then ring fences or protects that elective surgery, which at the moment, one of the challenges for both us and Derby is when it gets really busy in the hospital, we end up having to stand down theatres because we haven't got the beds in order to do that. So I haven't got that's what the situation is. That doesn't probably entirely address the problem, but I think that's because there isn't a way of entirely addressing it. But that is where we stand at the moment, if that's helpful.
That's enormously helpful, Hal. I suspect Kevin wants to come in on this. I see a hand up from him. Is it on this issue, Kevin?
Well spotted, Helen. Yes, it certainly is. I just wondered if it might be worth mentioning, Hal, as well, that we We're continuing with recruitment in theatres. We have 11 international nurses arriving to work in theatres soon, within the constraints, obviously, of our finances. And also the other thing that's slightly different from peak COVID is partly because of the infection control measures, but also because it's been seen to be a very efficient way of utilising our beds and our throughput, is that we now have protected post-operative elective capacity for surgery, which means that doesn't intermingle and doesn't impact when the hospital's busy with emergencies, which will help protect the capacity that we can get going in theatres. So that's another thing I think just to note.
Yeah, and very, very important in the context of the capital constraints Hal's just mentioned. So thanks for that, Kevin. Now we have 3 hands up. Margaret, please. You're on mute, Margaret.
Sorry. So just going back to the car parking issues and a request from Steve, really, and I noticed that there have been a few things in the chat about how this ANPR is going to work. And obviously you said there's an implementation group just sort of working on how this works. Can I just make a plea that when you have got some good information about that you can disseminate it to the governors, because not only is it of interest to ourselves and how we access the site, it's a very great interest to the public, who will probably be asking us questions. So I've got lots of things. I have no idea how these sort of systems work, whether there'll be barriers, whether there won't be. So, you know, at some point when you've got a clearer picture, could we have that information sooner rather than later, so that we can then advise members of the public who will be asking us? Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. Steve, did you want to come back on that point?
So yes, of course, Margaret is the answer. We'll come back to you on that. But just in terms of the couple of points raised in the chat, I was just typing the response, but I may as well address them now. So yes, blue badge holders will be free, and the system will enable us to facilitate that. And as part of the implementation work, we continue to work with staff side around the disabled car park provision, just to make sure we get that side of things right. So that is very much under consideration and being worked through at the moment. But absolutely, we'll get that information back to you once it's all finalised.
I'm loath to protract car parking, but I fear I might be just about to. We have previously taken a view in Chesterfield that if you had a blue badge, it meant that you needed convenient access to the hospital. It didn't mean that you were any more financially vulnerable than somebody who didn't have a blue badge, and consequently we'd always charged on the same basis. So I'm interested to hear you say that we won't be now, Steve. So I think rather than extend the conversation now, perhaps when you come back, and we always come back in detail on points raised in the pre-meeting, you could cover that particular point as well. Lynn. Are you there, Lynn?
I'm sorry, for some reason that button didn't work. Yes, I've got a supplementary question on car parking. Somebody asked me the other day, when we reintroduce car parking charges, will patients be able to buy the tickets that they used to have, where they could buy, say, I don't know, 14 visits for the price of 10, and it didn't matter how long they were actually at the hospital? I think you used to get them from the post office or WH Smith's. Will that be a provision that the public can access?
Thanks, Lynn. Do you have a quick answer to that, Steve?
So again, I'm not too sure on that one. I'll pick it up as part of the feedback, Lynn.
Right, that's super. Thank you very much, Steve. John. Hey.
Thank you. It's just a query on the staffing issues. You've got infection control that is, from what you were saying from your executive summary, you've got from 5% to 10%. Is that going to be a long-term issue, or do you consider that to be short-term? And if it is long-term, are you going to be addressing it by increasing your staffing then?
I'd very much hope that it's a short-term staffing issue. So over the space of 2 or 3 weeks, our absence levels jumped from 5 to 10%, which was almost all attributable to COVID. I'm hoping it will go down as quickly as it went up. That would be our expectation.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Norman.
Thank you, Helen. You've mentioned the budgets and the balancing of the budgets with effect towards elective surgery, and Al's mentioned some of it this morning. Now, I think we're getting longer, not shorter, for elective surgery. People keep going to the doctors, people keep getting referred, and it's the dog chasing its own tail. Now, didn't the government promise so many billion to the NHS to pass down to trusts like ours to enable us to utilise that money to balance the budgets to get more elective surgery done? If that isn't the case, or if it isn't, has it not reached Chesterfield yet?
Do you want to come back on that, Hal?
I think this depends on how political I'm allowed to be about it.
You will be candid whilst being appropriately circumspect, would be my counsel on the matter.
I think it is fair to say that as a system and as a foundation trust, we have some concerns about the realism of the financial planning that we have just been through, and that as a board we have written formally, led by Steve, to NHS England about some of our concerns about the risks to the financial plan as it stands. Sometimes some of the money that has been promised for a variety of things is to an extent on hold, including yesterday's announcement about the pay deal. Part of that, the funding is expected to come from slippage about some of the money they've promised for previous things. So the money doesn't always appear in quite the timely way that it's initially committed, I think it's fair to say. And it is true that we need to strike a balance with this. So I know that some other ICSs have been even more forthright in their concerns about the budget, and the end result of that is that they're then put into special measures by NHSE, and having their work marked on a daily basis and making life very difficult on a day-to-day basis. So there is that balance between us being realistic and maintaining our autonomy. Is that candid and balanced, Helen?
Definitely candid.
Thank you.
Thank you both. John R.
Hello. Coming back to the question, I can't remember who asked it now. I think it was Margaret, about the card that you can buy for parking, and that we've still got at least one card, and that with quite a lot left on it. What can we do with that one? There must be others like us.
We will add that to Steve's list of car parking Q&As, if we may, please, John. Thank you for that. Judith. Are you there, Judy? I can't see Judy. Can others see Judy?
On mute.
Yes, I can see her, but we can't hear you, Judy.
Is that okay?
Yes, perfect. Loud and clear.
Yes, it's a question to Hal, but first of all, a comment, exercising my right as a governor not to have to be so circumspect. I've been involved with the NHS now since 1977, and one of the things that really is depressing me at the moment is that all these years later, the NHS is still very much Now, is this a big P or a little p? I think it's a little p, political football. And until somehow some of this changes, it worries me for financial security. But that's the end of my comment. The question, well, it's a query, Hal. You mentioned, and it's very sad to see we're back up at Opal 4. And it's very sad to see the staff under such pressure again. Two things. Firstly, are these post-heat, even though it doesn't seem to be much cooler in my study, issues that will gradually drive down numbers attending A&E? Or the query I have is there any record, statistics that indicate still the type of things that people are presenting to A&E with? And is there firstly a correlation between that and primary care? I don't mean our primary care, I mean primary care in general, and exacerbations of conditions for which people require admission, in your opinion.
So we do keep detailed information about what people come into hospital with, and the immediate pressure overnight, last night and into today has undoubtedly been exacerbated by the current very hot weather. From the point of view of you often don't need huge numbers of extra people to come in with a particular condition to make a meaningful difference. So if you have an extra 10 patients admitted to hospital because of heat exhaustion or dehydration or related symptoms, then that makes a difference to our bed flow and operational management of things. So hopefully that'll be a short-term thing. The second bit about keeping data regarding people coming into hospital and what they come in with, absolutely, we do keep that. But it's worth reflecting on, one of the biggest single drivers of coming to ED is distance from ED. So if you're living in Matlock, you are much less likely to come to our emergency department than if you live in Hasland. And there is an awful lot about accessibility and ability to come. Now, linked to that, we do keep data about the individual practices, and there is some variability about that. And as a system, we're trying in a collaborative way to try and support places where access issues locally might be having an impact on ED. But as you can imagine, it's with a little p, quite political between primary and secondary care once you start getting into conversations like that.
Could I just have a quick follow-up, Helen?
Sure.
Of those people who are coming in, obviously, without an injury, and I'll leave mental health primary problem out there, are you discerning any trend in sort of medical issues for which people are presenting? I.e., are we starting, dare I say it, respiratory flu illness early, or is it across the board?
I think I've not heard from the teams that there's any specific increase in any particular conditions. Lucy's got a hand up, so she may have a view about what the situation is on EMU and what they're getting there in her clinical role as opposed to her governor's role, but I don't know if she had some other comment.
Thanks, Hal. Thanks, Helen.
Lucy, how is it?
Yeah, well, I just thought I'd come and support Hal on that one. I think it's fair to say that we're seeing a wide variety of presentations, and in terms of our admissions, I think we can't underestimate the acuity of what we're seeing. So people are presenting sicker, in fairness, and that, to me, it always feels as though that feels very anecdotal, but I think we're still seeing a runoff from the pandemic. It is fair to say across the board, there are issues with accessing primary care, whether that's from a personal perspective as to whether you want to bother healthcare services and you present late versus you're actually struggling to access primary care in the first instance and then presenting with complications of what could have been intervened with prior to. But we're all just trying to do what's best for the patients at the end of the day, and sometimes the system is creaking under that pressure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. And that was a helpful and informative exchange. So I always say, Hal, the best test of the quality of a chief exec's report is not in what's written down, neither is it in the introductory remarks I made, but it's in the amount of dialogue and conversation it stimulates. So it's definitely 10 out of 10 on all of those fronts. So thank you very much. And we give you a minute off, hopefully, for good behaviour, whilst we move on to item 5. Which is Freedom to Speak Up Guardian Review. So you'll know that we had for many years the wonderful Abby as our Freedom to Speak Up Guardian, and Abby has moved on to pastures new, and she's passed the baton to the equally wonderful Pansy. So I think it's a matter of weeks now since Pansy's taken up her role. So we're not going to ask her to give us chapter and verse just yet. But we did want to put faces to names and give her an opportunity to come and say hello to the Council of Governors and to give us some early thoughts. Now, I can't see you on my screen, Pansy, but I'm sure once you speak, you'll pop up.
Can you see me now?
I'm sure I will in a moment, but welcome and please feel free. I'm not going to go around the table, Pansy, because
Okay.
it would be too much of a test for you. It'd be too much of a test, I think, about remembering all those names. But it'd be lovely to hear a little bit about you and who you are and what you've been doing up to now and why you were motivated and enthused to take on the Freedom to Speak Up role and what it's going to mean.
Certainly, Helen. Thank you for having me. Good afternoon to all the Council of Governors here and everybody else on the board. I consider it a privilege to be appointed as Freedom to Speak Up Guardian for the Trust. And even though I started this role about 3 weeks back, as Helen mentioned, I've been in the Trust about 21 years. I was one of the first group of international nurses to be recruited by the Trust 21 years back. And I think they took a gap and they are doing it now. So I don't know if it was a good experience or a bad experience. So here we are. So I initially started working in the Trust as a staff nurse on a ward, and then I progressed to work with the clinical operations team. I'm still work with the clinical operations team as a clinical operations matron, so that is 14 years. And during my role as a clinical operations matron, I got in touch with Abby, and I used to work as a champion to the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian. Abby has always been brilliant in everything that she did, and especially how she brought the guardian role and how she made the culture of freedom to speak up widespread across the trust. So it was, I consider it a bit of a natural progression for me to apply for this present post, because as a clinical operations matron, I could support the staff across the trust, and this is a staff support role too. And all I want to do, like my predecessors, is to make people aware of the culture of speak up, how important it is, so I can guard the speak up culture of this trust. Get a culture of where people are transparent, where there's an inclusive culture of being openness. This is what I'm hoping to achieve, and we can only do that with our staff support and our support of our senior leaders and senior management. So after 21 years of night shifts, so here I am working in the daylight, and I consider it a privilege, and I'm grateful for this appointment. Thank you.
And we're delighted to have you, Pansy. We really are. And if you're a fraction as successful in this role as you have been in your previous roles, we should be very lucky indeed. And I'm sure you will be a great successor to Abby. So thank you for stepping up to the challenge. Now,
thank you, Helen.
Nicola did share with you the excellent paper that went to the last board meeting, and just kind of giving the current state of play with Freedom to Speak Up. And you can see that we're benchmarking well nationally, because there's a calculation they do about whether having a lot of them means you're still at the point where you're creating a great culture with everybody feeling confident to speak out, or you just got too many. But we've got lots, and they're the right sort of lots according to this national calculation. Sorry to put the headline of the report so clumsily, but that's the gist of it. But if you haven't had a chance to read it, I commend it to you because it's a good report. So are there any questions or thoughts or anything anybody'd like to share with Pansy? Well, I think that probably means a warm welcome, Pansy. And I think it also means that when you've given your first solo report to the board, it'll be a really good time for us to put you on the agenda for the Council of Governors, and then
Yes, please.
Give more of a perspective about your findings and where there's learnings that we need to be thinking about across the trust, and what it is be implementing that is kind of a systemic rather than specific to any particular concern that may be raised with you. And that'll be a great opportunity to do that. And we look forward already to welcoming you back. So thank you. Nancy.
Thank you. Thank you, Helen.
Very good. So that then brings us on, if we may, to the next section of papers. The next section all about management of risk and performance. And of course, we have KPMG for our external audit. And I'm really pleased to welcome Andy Cardoza to the meeting. I see you've joined us at the beginning of the meeting, Andy. So I hope it's been interesting for you with your audit hat on to see firsthand how the Council of Governors operates. But I'm sure you'll have lots of important things to tell us. And thank you for the presentation you sent in advance. And the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. And yes, it has been really interesting to hear the conversations, and especially just hear the interaction and the interest that everybody has in everything that's going on so far. So, yep, no, happy to be here, happy to present to yourselves. I think the paper might be presented on screen if Nicola can. If she can't, I think you've all got it anyway. Oh, thank you, Nicola.
Is that there? Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Thank you. Thank you. So if we just go down to the summary page, a couple of pages down, there we go. Yep. So as you can see from the summary page, this is our annual auditor's report that we present to yourselves as the Council of Governors. It was something that we presented to the audit committee back in June, presented to close off our audit really for the 21-22 year end. It's something that has to go onto your website and is a publicly available document for everyone around the Chesterfield area to see, and nationally, so it goes alongside your annual report and accounts. And it's something that was introduced a couple of years ago to make it more open and transparent in terms of what we as your external auditors were finding when we were undertaking the review of your annual report and your accounts. So there on the left-hand side, you can see the four areas that we look at. It's the accounts. So we look at whether or not your financial statements provide a true and fair view of the operations. We look at the annual report and we see whether it's consistent, A, with the accounts, and B, with what we know and our knowledge and experience of Chesterfield. Then we look at your value for money arrangements through the year, and have you got the arrangements to deliver good financial sustainability, good governance, and good 3 E's, the efficiency, effectiveness, and economy. We also look at irregularity, and as part of that, is your spend through the year legal, as it complies with the regulations that are provided to you through the NHS to spend the money that you have. And finally, if there's anything else that I see as I go through the audit that I think should be brought to the public's interest and notice, and that's if I think there's something that has been fundamentally wrong, gone against governance, gone against good practice, or illegal. On all of those points, I'll cover in a few minutes. Just to say, from my point of view, again, the 21-22 year end. Another difficult year in terms of the pandemic, and just as right at the top of the conversation from today, we know how hard everyone at Chesterfield is working. We know how much effort goes into deliver these services at a time of such a great demand increase across the NHS. So I want to take the time to thank Steve and Vanessa for all their help from the finance team, and obviously Lee as Steve's predecessor, in terms of helping us through the accounts process and making sure that we could undertake the audit efficiently and effectively from our point of view, and make sure it was a robust quality audit delivered. And it can't be done without a good set of working papers and a good set of accounts to begin with. So that was, I just want to note that for the record, Chair. Again, from my team, again, they worked hard to make sure that we delivered the audit in a really tight timescale. You have to produce the accounts at the end of May, and we have to produce the financial statements opinion by the middle of June. So it's that 6-week window when we nationally across KPMG we issue over 75 opinions to the NHS organisations that we work with, and most of those were delivered by that deadline, and which is a fantastic tribute to everybody within the NHS that we work with, but also for the teams across KPMG. So just turning to the right-hand side of the table, the good news there is that we did issue an unqualified opinion, so a clean opinion on the trust financial statements. Got an email popped up. It's all right. And then on the annual report, I was able to state that it is consistent with our knowledge and experience of yourselves, and nothing to report to yourselves, nothing to bring to the attention of yourselves. And on value for money, we didn't identify anything that was inconsistent or that we thought was a significant weakness from our point of view when we undertook the work. On regularity, again, there was nothing to report, no issues that I need to bring to your attention, and that's the same case with the other reporting. So on all those 5 areas, totally clean, totally good, and a really good set of points to be able to report back to yourself. No mean feat, as I said, in such a testing time for the NHS and all of your staff across the board. We'll just go down one page, please, Nick. So on the account audit, there were specific areas that we have to look at, which we raised as part of our audit plan. The valuation of property, plant and equipment, because there's such huge numbers that are involved, that is a significant risk from my point of view, and something that we have to look at as auditors quite specifically and carefully when we're doing the audit at CRH. The management override of controls, this is something that we look at every single organisation that we audit, private, public or charity, because of the potential for management to manipulate accounts. So we have to look at that at every audit. It's not specific to Chesterfield, nothing that you need to worry about. Why are we picking that at Chesterfield? Fraudulent revenue recognition, again, something that the FRC, the financial regulator, expects us as auditors to look at every single organisation. And then fraudulent revenue recognition, again, something that we have to look at. Within the NHS, fraudulent revenue recognition isn't a key issue for us because there isn't the need to manipulate accounts as there could be within a private sector setting where you have to produce bonuses and or share dividends, etc. But we still have to look at that, and we still go through that. Again, when you look at the right-hand side of the findings, there was nothing that was identified, no material misstatements identified as we carried out the audit, and that's, again, a fantastic achievement for yourselves in your accounting team. If we just go down one page, please, Nick. On the value for money side, again, as I said, the 3 areas that we look at are financial sustainability, governance, and the 3 E's, economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. We did identify on financial sustainability as part of our risk assessment that the financial sustainability was a significant risk. Not because specifically to do with Chesterfield, but more to do with a national issue in terms of how do you cope with the pandemic, how do you cope with the ongoing huge amount of demand, and as was mentioned earlier, how do you catch up in terms of the elective spend against a really tight budget, a really tight resourcing constraint that you have, and the ever increasing demand, as I said. So that was something that was pervasive across most of the organisations that we audit in the NHS, but something that I had to highlight as part of my risk assessment. When we carried out the work to look at what the arrangements you have and whether or not you can deal with it, within the envelopes that you have, within working with JUCD, the Joined Up Care for Derbyshire, the system, we were able to convince both internally and externally the reviewers of our work that there isn't a significant weakness in place. So again, the final column on that page where you can see the summary of our arrangements, all of that is green. So no significant weaknesses identified, which is again a fantastic place to be. The next few pages of the report just go through the detail of the value for money. So I wasn't going to go through that in a specific detail, Chair, but happy to take questions from members. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nick.
And thank you very much, Andy. It's lovely to hear you describe the audit in the terms you have, both the rigour with which everything was looked at, the clean bill of health, and as you pointed out, that implies a huge amount of work and diligence and a culture of good governance.
Yes.
Having the lovely headlines in hearing today. It's all too simple to go, isn't it? Oh, that's terrific yesterday and next. And I do think it's really important to reflect about how well this reflects, as I say, not only on Steve and his team and everybody who will have been working so hard in support of you, but everybody who obviously takes their accountabilities on a day-to-day basis so seriously in all these regards across the trust. So it's a lovely moment that we paused for a couple of seconds to reflect on.
Rightly so. And again, it isn't something that I report at every single organisation. This is something that when you get such a clean bill of health, it is something you should take great pride in. Yeah.
Absolutely. The other thing I have to say, and you may or may not know that I chair 3 organisations, but I don't universally hear the audit team spoken of as well as I do at Chesterfield. And that's not because people don't find the requirements onerous. They do. And I think they've become even more onerous, haven't they, with all the regulation and the increased scrutiny that you are under. But they do have a complete understanding about your philosophy of audit and what it is you're trying to do in terms of protecting the interests of patients and the community we serve. So I think great credit to you in framing what is an onerous process in such terms as we all understand the importance of it.
Thank you very much.
Certainly pleased to support you in that too. So, are there any thoughts or questions that Andy's presentation has prompted? Norman.
Hello, Andy.
Hi.
Excellent presentation, and obviously a lot of very detailed work, and I think we can see and respect the work that's gone in. Now, you mentioned I think it's on page 5, that everything was green, but there's one area there that's amber, and it said one significant risk identified. What is that?
Sorry, that was where I was talking about the risk assessment. So as part of our work at the beginning of the value for money work, we have to do a risk assessment. And as part of that, we identified financial sustainability as a risk because of the potential to overspend, because of the ongoing cumulative deficit across the system. But at the end of the year, taking into account the arrangements that you have to deal with that, the medium-term financial plans that you have, the SIPs that you have in place, etc., that you will deliver, hopefully in the future. I was satisfied that the arrangements are in place for you to deal with that significant risk, and it isn't a significant weakness at the end of the year.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
We have some other hands up, so wait, we just Nick, please, Nick Wood.
Yeah, hi. I'm surprised that coming in with the risks isn't the fact that we've got inflation running at over 9% and energy prices, etc., going through the roof. And I guess that inflation will even trickle down to every bandage and every plaster that we have to purchase as a trust. How insulated is the trust on energy costs? And is the fact that we have such high inflation a risk to the trust?
Two things there, Nick, just to point out. For this was an assessment to the end of March 22. So again, the kind of inflation that we're seeing now that's coming through wasn't as significant at that point in time. It certainly was feeding through in something that we will pick up as part of our risk assessment for this year, 22-23. In terms of how the trust is actually dealing with that, possibly, hopefully, Steve is going to come in on that. Yeah,
he's got his hand up. Steve.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so we can get into a bit more detail about this in the next section when I talk about the financial plan and my presentation, but certainly inflation is an issue and a risk for us this coming year. We did receive some funding for it, but it doesn't completely wipe out the risk in summary. But I'll talk a bit more to that when I do my presentation, if that's all right.
Lovely, thank you, thank you. John, please, John Kay.
Can we use this report as effectively a bargaining tool to actually increase the funding that we receive? Because it seems to indicate that it's external forces that aren't giving us enough to do the services effectively.
It's a public report. You can use it in any way you wish, John. However, one of the things that we have taken into account is the ongoing funding that you have, and certainly as part of as Steve's next presentation in terms of the medium-term financial plans that you have in place, etc. Whether there's any more money is again maybe something for the new Prime Minister to discuss with the new health secretaries. Yep.
I think actually, Andy, that might be a great segue into the next item. So why don't we thank you again, and thank you for coming. You're very welcome to stay.
No, I will stay. Thank you.
Oh,
yep.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to having you with us then, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Steve, you've been well teed up for your report. So if we can go to the finance update, that would be great.
I have, thank you. Nicola, I sent the presentation through. Are you able to bring it up on screen, or would you like me to?
Nick has literally just had to step away from her desk, Steve. Would you be able to share the presentation yourself?
Absolutely. Bear with me.
Thank you.
There we go. I can't see anyone else, but hopefully everyone else can see my presentation at this point.
I can.
Good stuff. Okay, so I think there's probably three things I wanted to cover today. I'm conscious people might not necessarily have a detailed background in financial planning and how it works generally in the NHS, so I wanted to just do a bit of context around general planning stuff. I'll then come on to how we approach it from a Chesterfield and Derbyshire point of view. And then probably the main bit of the presentation I wanted to concentrate on, just following up from some of Hal's comments earlier, was around what challenges does that leave us with this year and what are we going to do about it effectively. So in terms of how it works each year, we get a national planning guidance document that kind of sets the scene for planning, really. It sets out clear priorities for the NHS each year. It's generally released on Christmas Eve, which isn't necessarily the best timing, but very helpful in terms of shaping how we approach setting the plan. So for this coming year, we've got 10 clear priorities, which is quite a lot actually by normal standards. And I'm sure you'll recognise some of those from some of the conversations we've had before. We've talked a bit about workforce. The elective backlog clearly is a key area of focus. Mental health, again, a very, very high profile area nationally. And digital is something that we're doing a lot of work on in the NHS at the moment. In terms of how we bring all that together, so we take that kind of context, divisions will look at their priorities, but there are essentially three elements to the plan that we submit. We have to do an activity plan, a finance plan, and a workforce plan. I'm obviously talking about the finance bit of it, but the idea is that we aim to make those three sections of the plan as consistent as possible. So you're not saying you're going to do double the amount of activity by not spending any more money and not having any more workforce, as an example. In terms of how it works now, we're in a kind of more system orientated world. We actually do the system level return first of all. So we do a big system return where all the organisations' plans are collated and submitted, and that's the bit that kind of regulators talk to us about and scrutinise us based on. We then follow that with a specific organisational plan that we also monitor against in year. And just in terms of general context, I just wanted to set a kind of shift in the approach nationally. So there's very much a shift to planning with ambition nationally, and that's just to ensure we're acting in the best interest of patients, and making sure we're as ambitious as we can be in terms of clearing the elective backlog, for example. But what that does leave us with is risks within the plan, which we need to manage, which I'll come back to shortly. In terms of the process that we then go through as an organisation then, so actually it's a really well-established process which we've done well, I've been at the trust for about 8 years now, and the process itself is quite consistent. I guess the additional bit this year is the kind of more system orientated part of it. So how it generally tends to work, we obviously get the guidance to set the scene. We meet as a series of finance leaders and just describe to the accountable officers how we're going to approach building the plan up, just so everyone's sighted on how we're going to approach it. We then go away as a finance community, work with our divisional teams, and we tend to start with the forecast spend for the prior year as a starting point. So it's effectively a zero-based budgeting approach. We then adjust it for a series of known items such as inflation, any particular non-recurrent or exceptional spend items from that year that we need to adjust for. We have to make a saving each year, and that's dictated by the guidance effectively. So 3% was the minimum expectation from the NHS this year in terms of savings, and we also looked at our COVID cost assumptions. Following pulling all of that together, there's effectively a detailed process within the divisions where they summarise all their priorities and what are the key things they want to focus on, noting the planning guidance and what challenges they've got within their divisions. We get to see their cost improvement proposals and what they've been doing around transforming their services. And then essentially there's quite a detailed confirm and challenge process where divisions get to cross-challenge each other's plans. We then cross-challenge at a system level to make sure we've got consistency around assumptions on things like savings, inflation, for example. And what we tend to do is that we have an executive team, what we call a confirm and challenge, where if essentially the execs get into a room and make sure that we're happy with all the assumptions that the divisions are making and that the transformation programs are sufficiently ambitious, for example. Alongside all this process, we've been engaging with regulators to make sure they're sighted on how we're approaching things and what our key challenges are that have emerged through that process. And then finally, the other bit is around the kind of sign-off process around the plan. So before we submit the final plan, it has an airing at our hospital leadership team meeting so that the leadership of the organisation is sighted on what we're committing to as an organisation. It then gets an airing at Finance and Performance Committee so we can get some scrutiny around what assumptions we're making. And we had a board session prior to the final plan sign-off on the 20th of June, where the full board got to ask questions and make sure they understood the risks before signing up to the plan. As Hal mentioned, we wrote a follow-up letter to regulators just re-emphasising some of the key assumptions and challenges within our plan. And the end result of all that process is effectively we've submitted a break-even plan as an organisation for this financial year, as have all joined up Care Derbyshire organisations. So a break-even system plan and a break-even organisational plan is what we've got to work to this year. So the bit I want to focus on then, just to finish off, is the challenges. So what I've tried to do is describe the kind of 6 main challenges that I think we've got as an organisation that we need to manage. I've just stated whether or not I think it's largely a trust risk, a system risk, or a national planning risk, and then crucially, what are we going to do about it? So the first one is our transformation programme. We've got 3% savings to make, which for us is £8.5 million. In terms of what we need to do to make sure that's happened, we've got a continuous process of working with divisions to make sure we continually develop our savings programme. One of the challenges within that is around some of that will release capacity rather than cash, but what that will help us to do is deliver our elective recovery performance. In terms of other things we need to work on, there are going to be some national savings programmes which we will engage with once they're available. And there's some further work we're doing around how we tighten our financial controls further and make sure we've got a really good grip on expenditure, because it's really important we get the basics right as well as doing all the transformation stuff. Elective recovery is a really crucial issue for us. Some of it is system dependent because our performance and financial payment for elective recovery is based at a system level. But I think what we need to do with that is just be really clear with the reporting and how we're getting on against that target. the transformation, as I've said, is going to be really crucial in terms of giving us some capacity to deliver extra activity. And we'll continue to work across the system on maximising how many patients we can get through and clearing those waiting lists. COVID costs is another significant issue for us. Again, there's quite ambitious national planning assumptions around COVID. From my perspective, what we needed to do is a continuous review of COVID costs in line with whatever the latest infection control guidance is, and really clear reporting to make sure we're only absolutely spending what we have to in the context of the latest COVID guidance. Inflation we've kind of talked about already. As part of the funding settlement, we did get £2 billion specifically badged as energy funding. That doesn't necessarily take into account the fact that prices might go up further in autumn. Likewise, as you rightly said, there is pressure on all parts of our non-pay bill. All supplies have gone up, drugs, all of which will likely add pressure. So that's something we need to monitor closely. Again, going back to the kind of tight financial controls, we need to make sure we mitigate that by doing procurement really well to make sure we're only spending what we absolutely have to. But some of the inflation stuff is very much a national planning pressure and something that they hadn't anticipated when they set the planning guidance. So it's something they are cited on nationally. Again, we've talked about capital. I'll not go through in detail, but in summary, we haven't got as much money as we'd like to do all the things we'd like to do. We need to work as a system to really carefully manage our capital and make sure that we're really tight in how we manage that through the year. And just finally, uncommitted investments. Again, we're working on just making sure we've got really tight processes and we control investment so that we understand what we're making investments for and we've got funding sources for things and we're not adding to our financial challenge throughout the year. So that's going to be a really important factor in terms of the plan as well. I will stop sharing at that point. I appreciate that's quite a bit there, but hopefully that's helpful in terms of a bit of context around the plan and some of the challenges we've got going into this next year.
It's very helpful, Steve, and hopefully for any governors who have either attended or subsequently been able to watch the last board discussion, will give a lot more context and colour to why it is we found ourselves in the middle of the deliberations we did. So I anticipate that'll have prompted quite a number of questions or thoughts or comments. Who'd like to lead the charge? Nick.
Yeah, hi. I know from my career that as a manufacturer, we used to love supplying local authorities. And the reason for that was they weren't very good at purchasing. And we made a lot of money out of them. I'm pretty sure that applies to the NHS as well. And I just wonder, is there a plan in place to improve our purchasing? And I think at the moment there seems to be a trend with manufacturers to put prices up when they don't necessarily need to do it, simply because we're in a culture of increased prices, therefore let's put the prices up anyway. And I just wonder what we're doing in our purchasing to make sure that doesn't happen. We've all heard and read the sensational newspaper stories about one trust purchasing plasters for 5p and another one purchasing plasters for £1.50. I just wonder where we are as a trust in terms of making sure that we buy at the very best price. And secondly, just a point that struck me is the fact that we have a lot of roof space at Chesterfield Royal. I wonder whether we'd looked into solar power as a way of getting our energy costs down.
Great questions. Thanks, Nick. We'll go back to you, Steve.
Yeah, no problem. So first of all, on the procurement, I think important context, we actually benchmark really well in terms of our non-pay costs. So if you look at the model hospital, for example, we always come out really well in terms of how much we pay for stuff. So I think it's important to bear that in mind. The other bit I would add is that procurement is always a key part of our transformation programme. So we have a really well-established programme around how can we procure better and potentially reduce some of our non-pay costs that way. The other thing that's probably worth drawing out, though, is that actually we have the national category towers now, so a lot of procurement around the most commonly bought products in the NHS is now managed nationally. So whilst that does give us more buyer power, it means that we're reliant on the national teams kind of doing their job well to secure those prices. But what that does, I guess, mean is we're at less risk of overpaying compared to other places, if that makes sense. So hopefully that gives you a bit of reassurance around the procurement side of things. But it's something we're working really hard on and always do. In terms of the energy and solar panel stuff, again, quite a hot topic. So I look after the green agenda as part of another part of my portfolio. And I'm keen to bring our green plan to life in terms of some of the stuff we're looking at. There is a grant that's currently been announced nationally around how we can decarbonise some of our energy supply. So that's something I'm looking at in terms of what opportunities that gives us. And I've challenged the estates team to look at solar panels and if that's something we can consider as part of that process. I'm not saying it's necessarily something we can definitely do, but it's something that we are considering as part of that and potentially looking at whether we can get funding to do so. So I'll keep people posted as and when that process progresses.
Thanks very much, Steve, and thanks, Nick. Norman.
Hi, Steve. Just a question that confuses me. Why do the government give us a budget and then tell us we've got to make 3% savings on it? Why not take that off at the start and say, this is your budget, instead of, 40,000, there's 32 million, sorry, there's 32 million. Why say make savings? Can we dip into those savings and is there a penalty if we do?
So basically the way the government approach it is that there's always a drive for productivity. It's just the way that the NHS works. So how in the old world, before we moved away from payment by results, most of our income was paid on a cost per activity basis. And what happened is you got a tariff each year that tell you how much they inflated it by to cover things like pay award and non-pay inflation. But then they made it clear that actually you had a percentage of efficiency to deliver to make sure you stay balanced within the prices effectively. So it's just the same approach. All that they're doing is really saying, we're funding your inflation, but then we expect you, in order to deliver a balanced budget, you need to make a savings requirement, because as an NHS, we need to make sure we're delivering value for public money. So it's just the way they've always done it.
Okay, thank you.
You might have anticipated that answer, Norman, but it was a good question nonetheless.
Thank you, Helen. Good to have some support.
Judy.
Yeah, I think Norman read my mind there, but it's a bit of a follow-on from that. I'm not a finance person in the slightest, but this 3% thing, can we be sure that we still hold the reins as to where the 3% is taken off, or does the powers that be specify where the 3% is taken out? But I suppose what I'm trying to say, does there come a point when the delivery of patient care is threatened by this reduction?
So the first bit in terms of the 3% is it's within our control. So we determine our transformation program each year. We just have to operate within the required level of savings. But I guess there is some scrutiny around what sort of things you would include in that. So every year they would expect, for example, we included procurement and agency staffing reductions as an example. So if you didn't have that as part of your program, you'd likely get questions about it. So I think if you looked at most foundation trust transformation programs, you'd see some quite common themes within there. But it's entirely within our gift in terms of how we set that out. In terms of making sure we keep control of things, I think we need to make sure we continue to deliver our transformation and manage stuff well. What I always say is that good quality and good finances go hand in hand. And I think the transformation stuff we're working on isn't about making short-term cuts at the expense of quality. It's about transforming services for long-term benefit and sustainability. So, that's very much the approach we want to take as a team, and something that I'm really passionate about. So, we know that we've got some decisions to make in terms of balancing the operational and finance stuff, and it's not going to be easy, but what we're determined to do is make sure we do things in the right way, if that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
That's lovely. clarification, and that's not easy to do, Steve, but as you say, with the whole Royal Academy of Improvement, the whole focus on transformation, that's exactly what we're committed to doing. So that's really helpful to share with governors. So that brings us on to the last item in this group of papers. It's item 8, and it's the maternity assurance update. So thank you, Steve, and welcome, Krishna.
Thank you very much. Nick, are you able to share the presentation for me? Thank you. Thanks very much, Nick. So obviously I've been asked just to give the maternity services update. You'll notice in the corner of the first slide it sort of says about CQC, the Care Quality Commission. So the maternity services were inspected as good right the way across in May 2020. So that's the first thing I'd sort of like to start with. If we just go on to the next slide, I just wanted to put into sort of context the national focus. As if you pick up any of the papers and TV programmes, and there is a national concern and focus of safety within maternity services. And if you'll have heard, sort of Donna Ockenden, a sort of most senior midwife, has done a review at Shropshire and Telford, and is now has been requested to support with Nottingham maternity services as well for another review. These reviews go back a significant period of time, probably back to Morecambe Bay, which was 2015. The report came out from Bill Kirkup, and that was around the same sort of issues about failure to investigate where things perhaps haven't gone as they should have done, failure to learn from that because we've not investigated properly, and then failure to improve sort of the outcomes for women and babies. And the impact of that for the whole family has been played out very emotively in Donna Ockenden's report, and also in subsequent sort of programmes and news items. The impact of that can't be underestimated. There's also the increasing number of trusts with poor CQC ratings related to maternity. I was on a regional call just on Friday where I believe that CQC from September will, as a mandate, have been requested to go into every maternity unit. So they'll obviously sort of do that in a staged response, but I don't think they'll do whole system sort of response CQC reviews. I think that they're going to concentrate on maternity services nationally. So we will be expecting a further review, as quite right, to provide that assurance. Sort of here at Chesterfield, what we did is that we proactively requested regional support, so HSEI sort of support at that time, to come and look at. We've got really good outcomes at that point, so I'll go on to what sort of our outcomes are looking like at the moment. But what we weren't assured of, and what we've got sort of a few concerns that we discussed at the Quality Assurance Committee, was about the processes in place. So last year, if you'll remember, we have a clinical negligence scheme where it's quite involved. A number of different aspects have to be collated and information. And what we were finding is that we've basically got clinicians with huge stacks of notes trying to wade through and trying to find the information, the evidence to support the practice that they were giving. And it all seemed a bit not organised, if I'm honest. It didn't seem to be, when we were asking for things, you couldn't press the button and the information would come out. It seemed to be quite unwieldy processes that were in place within our maternity services. That's not saying that the care being provided to women and babies at that time was under question. It wasn't. It was about whether we'd got those robust assurance processes in place so that from a governance point of view, we could get the information timely. So we asked them to come in just before sort of Christmas. They came in. We had a report that was concluded in March 2022. It gave us some good headlines. It gave us some from that insight report about where we could strengthen some of the governance. And to be fair, the care unit themselves, we recognised that one of the first things that we were already trained to do was to actually separate the divisions out so that family care would have a more robust support for their governance processes, and that we were already doing that, and that was well supported by NHSEI. So we were already on front foot with knowing that that's what we needed to do. What we also have had is a new head of midwifery, Amanda Mansfield, and the clinical director, who's Jenny Parrott, had sort of recently changed, and obviously that was a new team coming together. What we have seen over the last sort of 4 or 5 months is that they've really embraced what they need to do to support a rigorous governance process. So that's they've supported what we call a transformation programme. It's providing that leadership and direction to the busy teams. So what we've got is that, we've got really busy clinicians saying, what do I need to do? Tell me what I need to do to focus on. If we just move on to the next slide, I'll tell you why that's important. So within the transformation progress, we were asked to do a Kirkup, so that goes back to 2015, and I'll show you where we are with that. There were 22 different indicators, issues that we needed to address. Ockenden, so when Donna Ockenden first produced her, not report, but her first line of issues that she felt that all trusts needed to address, there were 36 different asks to be addressed. Saving Babies' Lives, version 2, there were 75 different asks. And Ockenden 2, there's a mere 109. So there's 250 asks there and what our obstetricians and midwives were clearly sort of saying is, what is it that you'd like me to do first? What's the priority? So what the Maternity Transformation Programme has done is to put a bit of prioritisation, a bit of system process in there. Lee Alexander's done a fantastic work, and I'll show you sort of in the next slide in a minute, just about how we can visually see the progress, because it's quite disheartening if you've got over 200 different indicators and you can't see the wood for the trees. And that's how we felt the teams were coming across. That was the feedback from the teams. So they wanted help, and through going through that transformation programme, we feel we've given them support, we've given them additional resources. That's midwives, that's some extra PA time for consultants, that's governance. We've given them a lot of resources to support them. We're not alone. This is a national ask as well, that maternity services clearly know what they need to do, but struggle sometimes within the midst of everything to prioritise. So just before I go on, I just want to sort of, it's quite alarming when you've got something that says Saving Babies' Lives if you like to a lay person, it looks like, well, isn't that what we're doing? But this is if we describe it as a care bundle, it's a bundle of different things that we can do to make our stillbirth rates reduce. That's a national ask. And where we have got babies being delivered, they're delivered in a healthy state, and mother and baby has been, from a health education point of view, has been proactively supported through their pregnancy, which leads to better outcomes. There's a whole raft of things. What it doesn't mean is if you don't do them, then you're not doing the right things. It's about evidencing what we're doing. This is the assurance that we've been supporting the teams to be able to deliver on. If we just go to the next slide, Nicola. So we said initially that the Bill Kirkup came from a 2015, and I think we took the opportunity at that point in time to go back to those 2015 22 separate indicators and look and see where we are now, because 2015 is quite a long way away. We've got lots of people who weren't here then. So we took back. So it took us a little while to get full compliance. We took the opportunity to do good things. We trained out all our obstetricians and our senior midwives into investigating. If we go back to the first issue from an Ockenden point of view, which was we're not investigating properly and thoroughly to get the learning and the improvement out. So we took the opportunity to train all of our obstetricians and midwives, and we've done that. And that made us compliant with all of the Kirkup requirements in 6th of July when we had the last training session. So we feel we've done the right thing. We could have ticked the box and went way back when they had training, but we took the opportunity to do it right because that's what we believe is the right thing to do. As far as Ockenden, so the ask has been out for a little while now, and the dials on there, if I can just talk you through the dials. So the dials are, if we're looking on this and we're looking at the immediate and essential action, number 1, and that one has got 7 different parameters, and we're now at 7. We're compliant with that one. We're compliant with number 2, which is, we're not compliant with number 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7 currently, but the dotted line is where we're going to be at the end of July, and that is predicated on the training that we've been doing, and we've got all the guidelines updated, in date, embedded. And the reason that we will be compliant with those and not the other two is that we've done, even though it will look like we will at the end of July be compliant with 5 out of those 7, there's an additional workforce one at the end, by the end of July, that still makes us 95% compliant with all the asks from a knock and dump point of view. It's skewed for 2 of the questions, question number 4 and the question compliance for 4 and 6, because that means that we need to be compliant with Saving Babies' Lives, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. Once we are compliant with that, and that's a massive undertaking, once we're compliant with that, then we will be compliant with everything else. But those 2 indicators will mean that we're compliant with 95% of everything at the end of July, which is a different way of looking 5 out of the 7. But anyway, it's taken an awful lot of work. What we've done is, and what the teams have done is gone back to show us the evidence. Is that evidence robust? Is that evidence, can we replicate it? Is it something that we can automate from a digital enabler? Is it something that we can put on our training records that are push of a button? We don't have to have somebody sifting through notes and bits of piece of paper and a spreadsheet here. And we've got it all collated in one way. So it doesn't matter in one place. So it doesn't matter who's around. We can provide that assurance. So that's the Ockenden 1 compliance. If we just go on to Saving Babies' Lives, so as I said, to maintain with Saving Babies' Lives, you're able just to, fabulous. There are 5, this is sort of the 5 elements, which are smoking and pregnancy surveillance, fetal movements and monitoring in labour and preterm birth support. Those are the 5 elements. And these are, if you do all of these things, if you've heard us talk about care bundles, each one by itself doesn't mean that you've got less chance of a woman having a stillbirth. Altogether, there's a body of evidence that says if you do all of these good things, then that will invariably reduce your stillbirth rate. The number of stillbirths that we've had has increased. We were at a very low level and it's increased. It is still below the national average. It's still below the national ambition of where we should be. But nevertheless, it has increased. So there is an impetus for us to address where, and to make progress with this. The dials along the bottom, you can see how many different indicators into each of those elements. And what we're doing, what they're calling it, is a 2-weekly sprint cycle. So we've got oversight from myself and my executive colleagues with the leadership team to go through where they are this week, where they were 2 weeks ago. They were doing it in sprint cycles. So element 1, 2 weeks ago, there were sort of only 2 compliant, and now there were 6, and so on and so forth. If you look along to number 4 dial, what's really important there is 2 weeks ago we look like we've gone backwards. But what that means in essence is that the teams have actually reviewed the evidence base and they weren't happy. They weren't happy with what they'd got. They felt that they needed to amend a guideline in order to support the teams to do the right things consistently. So they've marked themselves down. Now, if we go down back to the national picture, one of the issues that we found is that people have ticked the box of all of these different issues and areas to support good practice and improve outcomes. People, they found when they've gone into organisations and reviewed what they're doing, they feel that there's been a bit of ticking the box and literally missing the point. So I put some challenge into the team about when will we see the trajectory, when will we be fully compliant? And they came back and said, they've got to submit on the 6th of January, and they feel that that's a reasonable time. That would, at the time when we were asking, that was a 6-month time frame. I should expect I was going about 6 months. That seems a very long time. That seems far too long. And we had a really robust challenge about and had a conversation. And actually, I was more assured of where they were and what they were doing was the right thing by the fact that they questioned themselves and moved that dial backwards and were doing the right thing to get their evidence base, review practice, circulate it, get it embedded, socialise it and get it really embedded. Because if we tick the box, we will miss the point because we won't have embedded practice, and it's that embedded practice that will keep our women safe going forward. So if we just move on again. Thank you, Nicola. So where are we at the moment? We've got sort of where we are with the actions. I think the oversight that we've got the weekly, as I said, meetings with the care unit as well as executives. We've got our local maternity and neonatal services, that's the Derbyshire led, to support that progress as well. And we've equally got regular touch points with the region about saving babies' lives. And we've got our next feedback session. We've sent off where we are on our evidence. We'll have that on the 25th of this month. There are capacity issues within the team. Whilst we've put investment, not everybody is in post. We've increased and put some business intelligence support in, and that's being actioned currently. We've also escalated that we do have a digital enabler, but we are waiting for that. John Court is fully signed to the back, and I had a meeting with him yesterday about where we are with the upgrade, because that will support a lot of automation and stop clinicians sort of having to audit note per note, because it should already be on our digital system. And some of those actions we're clarifying with region because the evidence base isn't clear. What we think we're submitting isn't clear. So if it's not clear for us, it wouldn't be clear for everybody on the national stage either. And then if we just go on to the final slide, which is about sort of general oversight and assurance. So we've got the weekly meetings are there to actually support the teams, celebrate successes, because it's been a hard slog to get us where they have, and they've really embraced that. And actually, they had a whole series. They had over 600 incidents that we classed as a backlog, and they've managed to clear that backlog. It's taken a number of months and a lot of concerted effort and retraining and so on and so forth. But actually, they've all done that. The obstetricians, the midwives, they've all worked effectively as a team to do that. It's really important to celebrate the team. And then it's to champion some of those escalations, which I've just talked about, which is about supporting with a digital enabler. What we have going through this, we've got a monthly report that goes to our Quality Delivery Committee and our Quality Assurance Committee. We had an extraordinary maternity services view and a focus on that. It was only undertaken earlier this month. But in between our regular Quality Assurance Committee meetings, we've obviously got oversight, and we've got those monthly updates going to our non-executive colleagues so that we can keep track of that progress and make sure that we're monitoring that we're on track to complete. And then obviously we will be monitoring those indicators as well of potentially adverse incidents. And we do that as a regular sort of update to Quality Delivery Group and onto Quality Assurance Committee. More than happy to take any questions.
Krishna, thank you very much. That was a very comprehensive and necessarily and properly detailed description of where we are and what we're doing. And I'm sure colleagues will have lots of questions and comments. Just before I open it up, I would like to invite Jane in her capacity as chair of the Quality Assurance Committee to maybe not add any more detail, because clearly Krishna's done that very well, but perhaps to help frame this issue for the conversation with governors.
And thank you, Helen. Thank you, Krishna. That was a really brilliant presentation, because this is really difficult to get a grasp of. There are so many different things in maternity. Even if you look at a patient safety incident where things have to be reported, lots of things go external, all sorts of things that don't seem to have the same governance, if you like, for some of the other services. So I think it's very difficult for people to always understand what's happening. I think Krishna was very good to point out the number of key lines of inquiry that we've been working against, and we've been looking at this with an absolutely forensic eye through Quality Assurance Committee since Ockenden came out, which was at the end of 2020. And I just want to emphasise what Krishna said. Up until May, we really were absolutely, truly invested in sorting out the governance of this service and getting digital solutions so that we could show against these key lines of inquiry that, we had robust evidence and we could pull that evidence easily. So I don't think you should underestimate the amount of work that's gone into that. I also want to emphasise that this is about clinical leadership across the professions. This is not just about midwives, this is across the board and has needed the help and support of everybody, from business intelligence, as you've heard, to clinical directors, to midwives, to everybody. And then I suppose I wanted to say we've had a number of quality assurance committees that have been extraordinary committees over that 18 months when we've been testing out our assurances. And I would say no one external has told us anything that we didn't know ourselves. And I think that is something that is really important for governors to understand. I think it's very important that the trust owns its own issues, knows its own issues, and puts in place the right grip and pace to manage it. What we have seen, though, since May has been a step change in terms of grip and pace, because we all recognised that against a resolution of the governance matters, actually, there was a shift in one of our outcome indicators, which Krishna's just mentioned. And that was a very small shift upwards in the stillbirth rate. And it's also against a national rise in stillbirth rates as well, potentially maybe related to COVID, but we're not sure about that at the moment. So obviously that has refocused some of the grip and pace, because it's one thing to say we're sorting out our governance matters, but it's quite another thing to say actually our outcomes may be being affected. So hence why we've had a further extraordinary quality assurance committee. So I think with that, the only other thing I'd like to say is that we took this to board as well. We do keep board updated on maternity. I'm the maternity safety champion for non-executive directors. We do test out some of this by doing safety walkabouts and safety forum meetings as well with staff, etc. So we've got a whole list of things that we've got in place. But at board, we did raise two issues about support for further enhancement and speed of rollout of K2, which is the digital solution, in order to enable us to get this governance stuff well and truly licked with a minimal amount of effort. And then secondly, we flagged up some potential around we may need some more staffing around leadership in that care unit, which is again part and parcel of potentially what is a more normal national model. So I just wanted to emphasise to council governors the amount of work and oversight. There was a bit of a moment when we had to swallow very hard, both Krishna and I really, about saving babies' lives and compliance by the end of December this year, and particularly against a background of CQC inspection, etc., etc. But actually, it's the right thing, and it's been agreed regionally, and it's been agreed across our system that it's the right thing. We are not about turning indicators positive without being absolutely confident that we've got the underlying clinical practice. And I think that's a really strong message again that Council of Governors need to hear. Against all this, we still have really positive experience coming through from our mums. And as you've seen, we've got some really good historic CQC ratings, but we've also got CQC patient survey, which is much more up to date and actually also indicates a really positive experience. I think the staff are under pressure. There's a lot of work going on here, and also against an increasing number of people booking to have their babies at our unit, as more and more units are deemed to be requiring support. So, for example, Sheffield and Nottingham, actually, mums choosing where they want to have their babies, and that, of course, is putting units like ours under pressure. So, I think the maternity situation is not the reporting, the governance, the kind of monitoring of it isn't going to go away, and especially since we've now got the Ockenden 2 key lines of inquiry to respond to as well. So I think the team are doing a great job. I think it's not been easy, and I think it still won't be easy. But I think as I said, we're absolutely owning our own issues, and I think the team are progressing with as much grip and pace as is absolutely possible for them to give to this. Thank you.
Thank you both. It's great to hear not only the work Krishna's leading, but the oversight the committee are providing. So I'm sure that's a very helpful full picture now for governors. Any questions or comments or thoughts on the back of what you've heard from Krishna or from Jane? John Kay, please.
I'm just wondering whether or not we've got a timeline on your integration of IT and information transfer as to when it will actually be helping these people to actually sort out where they can get the notes from and transfer the information, because that seems to be a key underlying element that is slowing processes down. Sorry to be blunt.
No, I'll be if you'd like me to answer that. So yes, I sort of had a conversation with John about that, about coming back with the timeline. So he's coming back next week about a timeline. So we're dependent on an upgrade of what K2 is their digital system, and making sure we need to be clear about the timelines, quite right, about what that will mean, because it will mean more training for staff to make sure that they are able to, information in is information out. So we need to do that training as well. And is it something that we need to do, put something else in as an interim if it's going to take a phenomenal amount of time? I think we'll come back with that timeline to discuss at our oversight meeting with the care unit the week after next is what we're intending to do, to give us a heads up on what will that look like, so the teams can sort of frame what they're doing around that. Be quite right to raise that.
Thanks, Christian. I see John wants to come in too.
Yeah, John, I don't think you've been blunt. I think you've made a very valid comment. So the K2 build that we're doing is both hardware, firmware, software, and then education. So we need to get it right. And critically, this will be the same system that Derby adopts as well next year. So we're certainly not behind. I'll have accurate deployment dates, and when we can then take data out, because we've got to use it to get the data out, as Krishna says, probably in a couple of weeks. The reason being is that the build stage is nearly finished, and once we've done the UAT, sorry, the user interface testing of that element, then we can be far more accurate about how we can get the staff using the system, and then be able to do the relevant reportage. So my honest answer is, at this moment in time, I don't accurately know. We're talking 3 months, not 6, 9 months, that's for sure. So, we're on with it. But we'll have an accurate timeline from the project manager once we've actually finished the architecture, which is, I've been told, nearly done and is on time. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else like to come in on this? No. Well, it's been really, really helpful and comprehensive. There is one last word to Norman, please.
Sorry, Helen, I was a bit slow there. Krishna, may I, as a governor, congratulate you on your recent academic professorship. It's nice to know that the leaders at the Chesterfield Royal are of your calibre, and I'm sure that you'll put that all into good practice, and it's being shown in what you've just presented to us just now. So well done and congratulations.
Thank you.
Beautifully put, and there's lots more where that came from in the chat too, Christian, if you haven't managed to see it already. So congratulations. And our next item is a presentation we actually had a board and had a very good discussion on the back of it. So very much looking forward to Governor's hearing it first time today, and it's about the Dermatology Pathway. And Kevin is going to take us through some slides.
Thanks, Helen. So next, kindly put the slides up. So as the front sheet paperwork that goes with this presentation illustrates, this isn't just about a dermatology pathway. This is about giving you an example of change that the teams have done and are trying to implement it in the hospital and in the wider system, and also about the associated difficulties that go with that in implementing change in the wider system, especially involving primary care partners. It describes engagement with a body called the Clinical and Professional Leadership Group, which is a forum of clinical and social care leaders within the integrated care system, where this pathway has been identified as a driver, if you like, to develop a robust governance system that was lacking, wasn't there before, and everything was a bit more chaotic. And this robust governance system, it's very important that it's developed so that it doesn't impede change that is good for patients and good for the system as a whole as well. So that's the purpose of this this item. So the pathway. So Hal was actually involved in this a lot before I took up post, so he knows quite a lot about the clinical aspects of this. But dermatology referrals, only about 10% referrals had any images come in them, so pictures of rashes and lumps and bumps on the skin to help with clinicians to triage them and prioritise them and say we need to see that urgently or not. and the referral system wasn't completely electronic. There were a lot of paper coming in, so it's quite inefficient and difficult to deal with those referrals in a timely fashion. There's also a transition from rather the choose and book from a GP to the choose the service, and then the system decides what to do with that referral. Of course, when a system has got a lot of referrals coming in, delays to an appointment for a specialist opinion often means delays to treatment. And so therefore the whole concept of initial advice to the GP upon receiving a service, receiving a referral with some more information on it, allows earlier treatment, reduced need for appointments, and also allows the primary care team to then use that knowledge in the future to treat further patients with similar conditions, which may mean that they may not need to send them up to secondary care. If you can go on to the next slide, please, Nick, that'd be great. So the teams determined what could be done, and it was fairly simple, really. So in addition to the referral with the information on the clinical information about what treatment had been tried or what treatment had been thought of and not worked, as well to attach a clinical photo of the lesion, or say you've got a rash on your arm that was troublesome and hadn't responded to initial treatment from your GP. And the team asked that preferentially all non-cancer referrals would come via this route, so this wasn't particularly appropriate for things where the GP thought there was a malignant condition or something like that. And it was thought that this would allow efficient triage and then advice to go back to primary care, and the hope was then that a lot of those patients could be managed in primary care with the benefit of the specialty advice that had come through on the back of the photo and the clinical information. And importantly, primary care still had the facility, if they wished, that they had difficulties with the system, the new system, to make an older style referral. If you can go to the next one, Nick, that'd be great. So the benefits are patients can be seen and treated as quickly as possible. They'd often be treated nearer to home. They wouldn't have to come to the hospital. Other proposed benefits would be that patients could then decide how the treatment went, and they could decide whether they needed an input of a specialist. Often, as I've mentioned already, reduced timescales for patient treatment, so they could be treated in the community early. Supports the GP to reduce their number of referrals in for specialist consultations across some pathways, which obviously would be a good thing for the patients and all the services. Provide rapid access to special advice on individual patients, including recommending primary care how to interpret such things as response to treatment or any further investigations that might need to be doing at a primary care level before we could make a decision in secondary care. To ensure all the tests and the treatments start right at the start of the pathway rather than waiting a few months before people come to the hospital. Reducing the risk of hospital appointments not being necessary, so people come up and they've waited a few months, and then that must be very frustrating when patients come and the clinician says to them, well, actually, if you'd have just had this simple treatment that we could have told your doctor about, it would have helped. And as I mentioned already, it will provide a valuable education resource to help guide healthcare professionals in the future to reduce the amount of patients they need to send, and as I've said already, to reduce the amount of patients that are waiting for treatment. If you go to the next one, please. So when this pathway was conceived, there was some consultation with primary care bodies. There's something called an expert advisory forum in dermatology, which involves primary care people with an interest in dermatology and secondary care people here as well. And they discussed this and felt that it was a reasonable thing to do for this condition. And guidance was produced to help general practice understand the change and what was going to happen and the steps they'd have to take and why it was being introduced. And this was published through the local medical committee of GPs in November, and feedback was invited at that point. And if you go on to the next one, please, Nick. And this is just a schematic that tells about promoting the change on from that. So I won't go through all of this, but as you can see, it went to quite a number of bodies. It mentions LMC again, it members of GP membership bulletin. It mentions something called Derbyshire Pathfinder, which a lot of the Derbyshire GPs use the Pathfinder system. It's an electronic system that they can look up information about conditions and then advises them on the way to make referrals and then provides a link through to the referral system. So if you can go on to the next one, please, Nick. But after it was launched, if you like, there were a few issues and concerns raised by GPs in the primary care community, and they were concerned about some of the distribution of workload. They were saying, well, this is extra work for us and extra work for colleagues in primary care. They were saying that perhaps it was increased complexity of the referral process. They not only had to tap something on the computer or ask someone to write that for them, or they now had to arrange for the patient to come and have a photograph taken. And because of that, obviously they had concerns about whether there was capacity in primary care for that. And in addition, as I've mentioned already, really there was concerns about where the decision was approved, and they wondered whether the expert advisory forum and then sending out information to GPs and inviting feedback but not really receiving a lot back was an appropriate forum, an appropriate way to approve these things. So really that summarised in the last line there that there was concerns about what would happen with future pathway developments and how we would govern change in the system as things go forward. If you can go to the next one, please, Nick. So this led to a discussion of this group I mentioned right at the start when I started talking, the clinical and professional leadership group, and I was present there and so was Hannah. I thought it was a very good discussion. We discussed, we used this as an example really of how change would need to happen in the coming months and years in various pathways, not just dermatology, of course, across the hospital, and how that would be governed, how it would be understood by all stakeholders in the pathway changed, and be sure that everyone was cognizant really of each other's pressures, so we could be sure we were putting in the right system. So we felt that the model needed to be understandable. Obviously it didn't get duplicated with lots of different bodies, it was just came to one decision-making body, and it was very important, as I mentioned already, to involve all relevant stakeholders. So it felt it would best that the system was best if there was feed-in from advisory and transformational groups, and then perhaps the CPLG, this group I've told you about, could then provide an overall view upon the clinical advisability and quality of that pathway change, and not perhaps make any decisions about the finance, but have a view about whether the pathway change was going to be value for money in terms of what was already in place, and being cognizant of all the other financial pressure and capacity problems across the system. So really it was then, once that recommendation had been made, there'd then be a clear route to feed into delivery boards and other provider collaboratives in the system. So these discussions produced a basic system or outline of governance which is still being worked on, and I will be getting involved in all discussions about that and the model development. And I think it'll be I think the right word is iterative process. You know, it's likely to be an issue that comes along with a more transformational change, and then perhaps the governance structure is looked at and analysed and see if it's still robust. But I'm confident that we have a decent forum there where these things can be discussed and taken forward, which I think is very important, especially as we move into the financially challenged world of integrated care systems, where we're going to have to work very closely together to try and get the best bang for your buck, if you like, from the money that we've got, to be sure that we can see and treat and manage as many patients as possible. And if you just go to the last slide, Nick, this slide may be a bit difficult to understand, and don't bother with the small writing. And I did notice they put amendments. They spelled amendments wrong on the top, which was a bit of a shame. But as you can see at the bottom there, those orange boxes, these expert advisory forums, transformational change forums, will basically lead into the clinical professional group, and a decision will be made at that group about whether they think the change is advisable. And we'll have to take all things into account, such as, so for instance, the dermatology, some of the GPs were saying, well, we haven't got capacity to see this, to do this, you know, it's taking us away from seeing other patients, so we need to take that into account. But also we need to think, is there any other way we could deliver that? You know, if someone needs a photo taken, does it need to be taken in each individual practice? Could it be done at a central point? We've got the development of community diagnostic centres coming forward in the next few years. So there's all sorts of things and pathway changes to consider in that. And as you can see, that green box is this group I was talking about. and that would feed into delivery boards and provider collaborative leadership boards and things like that. So really this item is just to provide you with some illustration of the difficulties of that change, a bit of the change that we're doing as well, but also a bit of assurance that we're fully engaging with the rest of the system to be sure that we are central to development of governance processes about this. So I'll stop there and I'll answer any questions if anyone has any.
Well done, Kevin. And there's a couple of questions straight away. Mike, please. Are you on mute, Mike?
Getting there in the end. Yeah, I'm sorry to talk about money, because I think that was an excellent presentation and I think it was an excellent idea. But I seem to remember about 20 or 30 years ago, we tried to do something similar. And admittedly, funding arrangements were different at that stage. But it basically died a death because it was considered that it was a potential loss of income for the trust, but despite increase in costs. Is that still a worry?
So I think that's a good point, Mike. There have been examples in the last few years since I've been at this trust where we have taken decisions to implement pathway change that have lost the trust money but have been the right thing for the patients. I'm thinking about my area here. We introduced a straight to test system for people with concerning bowel symptoms, and we're at that point of payment of our results. We lost the income from the outpatient appointment, but we felt it was the right thing to do to get the patients seen quicker. And you know, very importantly in that regard, as most of them don't have anything worrying, to reassure them that they don't have anything worrying. So there are examples of that. I mean, I think that's a really good point, but you know, for me, I think surely that's the whole point of the integrated care system, that we should be saying, look, this might be costing Chesterfield a bit more, or this might be costing the GP community a bit more, but actually it's going to be beneficial for the system in terms of quality, beneficial for the patients in terms of access to treatment, but also when you put it all in the round, it'll actually save a bit of money overall. So I think that's the whole point for me of the RCS. I can see Steve nodding there. So I'm sure that is.
Yeah, I mean, I quite agree. I think you're absolutely right. But it's just, you know, it would be unfortunate if the trust lost income as a result of this.
Yes, it would, but I think
that's life now, isn't it? And it plays also to the role of governors, because governors and board are no longer just sitting on their own fiduciary duties, but under their duty to collaborate. And I think as long as, you know, we can make the NHS pound go further while getting better clinical outcomes and a better standard of patient care, we'll just have to hold our nerve through the period of transition.
Good. Okay.
Margaret.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Kevin. I just wondered, in your proposed clinical governance model, obviously working within the system, at some point we should be consulting with the patients who are going to use the system. And I mean, as the lead, I get a place at the moment on the what has been the Derbyshire Engagement Committee, and they're very strong on actually, you know, as a new pathway is being developed, that the patients it's going to affect are consulted. And I couldn't see anything in your model where that would actually happen. Has that actually been talked about, discussed?
No, so Margaret, you're quite right. That does. So that would so various implementation boards and change groups have patients on them, but also we did discuss that at our discussions about the governance as well, that it's important to have the patient voice there. So yes, that's going to be brought into it as well.
Thanks, Margaret. Important in this context, but more widely, obviously. Pervez.
A scheme like this can only succeed if the GPs have their heart in it and if they are appropriately upscaled. And I must say, in Chesterfield, my dermatology colleague, Graham Culver, has done sterling amount of work over the years when this was a concept nationally, only concept. We actually did it, and we're doing it again.
No, you're quite right, Pervez. And I was a junior doctor here 31 years ago, and Graham Culver was a consultant then doing sterling work in that regard, so he continues to do so.
Thank you. Luke.
Mine was more just generally a comment over a question, because I was very close to this piece of work myself. So I'll not comment on the actual piece of work, but the outcome of the proposed governance model, that's really welcome. So I know in the expert advisory forums, that's something we've wanted to see coming out for a while. So it's really welcome that we've got a proposed model there. So just a thank you, really.
No, thanks, Luke. And I think it'll be important for when it's finalised in a few weeks' time, we send it back to people like you to have a look at it and be sure that everyone thinks it's fit for purpose.
Yeah, no, more than happy for that, Kevin. Thank you.
John Kay, please.
Thank you. My sort of comment was really based with regards to patient involvement, and I just wanted to share best practice. We're at the moment developing mental health, learning disability, dementia and autism commissioning teams. And as part of the pathway development of that, we are inviting local groups actually onto the commissioning process. And it's good practice, and it's supported by research from the Sheffield Health Research area. So I'm just wanting to re-emphasise, can we have within the pathway development programme patient groups, patient feedback as an integral part of the process?
No, thank you, John. And it'd be very helpful to take that back with discussions. We've discussed patient involvement already, but it will be helpful to take it back and say, you know, the governors at the Royal Hospital were also very keen for that and thought it was of prime importance. So I'll take your opinions back to them.
Thank you very much. And some comments also of appreciation in the chat. So well done. Thank you very much, Kevin. I'm sure we'll hear more not only about this pathway and how it works, but also other priority pathways for service redesign and improvement over the months. So thank you very much for taking that to us today. We're now on the last lap. We're in the final substantive section, which is about engagement and involvement, and we need to talk about the issues that were raised by governors in the pre-meeting. Now, a number of these we've already covered as they linked into items that Hal mentioned in his Chief Exec's report, so we won't reiterate those. And a number of the items that were raised, frankly, need a pithy, short response. In the written reply we always provide to governors, conscious that, of course, you're not raising questions usually on your own behalf, but on behalf of your constituents. So it's always handy for you to have that written reply. But there's still a number of them that I think it would be sensible for us to at least get an initial response from our executive colleagues today. So we will just work our way down the list if we may. I'm going to address them to you in the first instance, Hal, but if you want to refer them to colleagues, please feel free to do so. So the first one is about the adequacy of our nutrition arrangements with respect to people who have a celiac condition. And are we content that that is are we assured that those arrangements are in place and robust? And allied to that, have we given consideration to putting people's dietary requirements on the board above their bed in the same way we'd say, you know, James prefers to be called Jim, because people are not always, in their best health to be explaining these on a kind of, menu by menu basis. So can we pause there and hand those to you?
So if it's regarding having a gluten-free diet when in hospital, then absolutely that is available for patients when they're in hospital. I believe it is the case that specific dietary requirements are put up above patients' beds in order to highlight that. That was certainly the case when, from my perspective, when I was regularly working on the gastroenterology ward, but I accept that might be a slightly unusual situation, but I think it's just widespread across the trust. I don't know if Krishna, if you can add anything to that.
So,
okay, thank you.
Krishna, sorry, I was going to, yeah.
Feel free, Kevin.
Well, so I was going to say that it is the case across the trust, but it's part of the admission paperwork and assessment as well that the teams ask about any dietary requirements, and if the patient's not able, ask the ask the relatives about that and the carers.
Okay, thank you very much. The next one is about stroke and the concerns we have about the our stretched resource, particularly in terms of stroke consultants. And I did relate to colleagues that it is causing us a lot of concern, but on the basis of the balance of risk, we've had to put in arrangements that mean that we keep the service, the hyperacute service, running at Chesterfield as the best outcome for serving the whole population, given the pressure on adjacent Trust 2 and the fact that we've got specific help coming from Sheffield to help us through the period of leave and the extra complications that causes. But I don't know, Hal, if there's anything you'd like to add to that.
I think you've summed it up very well, to be fair, Helen. There's ongoing discussions that are happening. We had further meeting with regional colleagues and teams on Monday. We've got another meeting next Monday. We're confident that we have relatively robust and safe contingency plans for the coming weeks and months, but there is a longer term issue. The trouble would be as if we were to precipitously close our own hyperacute stroke unit, then it would definitely put potentially much greater risk on the surrounding hyperacute stroke units, with an overall negative impact on clinical care. That's the balance we're trying to strike.
Thank you very much. I have, just so executive colleagues are aware, promised in response to a request, Council of Governors, a teach-in around our approach to risk management, including the BAF, but have suggested it would follow on naturally and be best timed after we update the outcomes on the strategy and agree the new success criteria, because then all of those things will link through to the strategic risks we're keeping an eye on. But we do need to put that into the forward look, so we'll do that. The next one that I think we need to raise now is about there is word abroad that we're going to have a chief AHP, and whether or not it's possible or appropriate for you to give an update on that here.
I'm very excited to give an update on that. Yes.
To do that.
So we have Lucy Smith, who will be taking up the role of lead AHP from the beginning of September. It's something that I wanted to do, and it sort of follows the national sort of ambition, really, to raise the profile for somebody to lead across the whole gambit of allied health professionals, so not just our physio and OT colleagues, but the full gambit. And that will mean the reason it's sort of taken a little bit of time is because obviously that releases the requirement we need to support the head of therapies within the divisional structure. But Lucy will be supporting, and this is a fantastic opportunity for us to support increased looking at pathways and how we rotate posts across the system. And Lucy's been really heavily involved in that for some time. So it's a really good news. It elevates and puts on the map how much we appreciate and recognise the value of our allied health professionals within the organisation. So I'm really pleased with the post, and we'll do some proper comms going out. So that's why you've not heard about it, because we're just between our annual leaves, but it will be from the beginning of September. It's fantastic news.
Thank you very much. We have a request that Hal's Chief Exec report might give even more precise detail about the situation with COVID. So how many patients we've got in, how many are in ITU or, having escalated sort of care, and hopefully not, but any deaths that might be arising. So we'll incorporate that, if we may, please, in future reports. And then we've had some feedback about the TPs. It's twofold. One is there seems to be a mixed church about whether the TPs are still liked, used, and do we need to reflect as to if that is the best way of providing additional accommodation of the right sort for staff to relax and refresh in. So we leave you to have a think about that, because I'm sure that would require something approaching a big conversation. But more urgently and specifically, apparently the one at the back of critical care is not fit to walk into, and the cleaning staff have refused to tread in. So it would appear that we're having some difficulty in maintaining them, whatever the views about using them are at the moment. So again, we might leave that one with executive colleagues if we can. And we had a very helpful update also on the issue that was raised in previous pre-meetings about mixing staff food with patient food in ward fridges. And pleased to hear that there's some progress on that front in terms of segregating the food, and on a promise of segregating the fridges in due course. So that was a good update to get, and no doubt if there is an update, we'll include that in the written response to these questions. And the last one we need to raise now, but by no means least, is there appears to be quite a broad range of experience in governors' constituents who need physio, with some being required to wait 3 to 4 months, and others having early and easy access and fabulous ongoing care. So we were wondering if there is a problem with regard to how it is we're managing access and ongoing care through the physio service. And again, probably maybe one for a short comment today, but definitely one to take away and look into further on the back of the concerns expressed. Anything you, Hal, or colleagues would like to say now on that particular one?
I'd have to look into it in more detail regarding, and I guess there might be, for the more detailed answer, it might be helpful to know where the specific issues are, so which bits of the physio services are serviced within our direct control in the hospital and what is in the community.
Yeah, well, we will ask those 2 governors who raised it, so we will make sure that the details of those get through so they can be properly considered. Very good. So we'll pause for breath in terms of feeding back the items that were raised in the governor pre-meet. And we will move on to governor feedback. So is there any feedback from governors? Margaret?
Hi. Keep it fairly brief because I'm conscious of time. I've already mentioned that I have been attending the Derbyshire Engagement Committee on behalf of the Trust as lead governor. That committee has now been stood down because it was a CCG committee, but it's being replaced by a Public Partnership Committee, which will, for the moment, is keeping the same membership for the first 6 months at least, but it does have a different chair. First one of those is on Tuesday of next week, so I'll let you know whether any changes are going to happen in terms of the terms of reference or whatever, but for the moment I'll keep attending this new Public Partnership Committee, and that's where I raised the issue about public consultations, because there is a big strong requirement really that if we're going to change services, we actually consult before we do it. So that's really why I raised it a little earlier. The other bit of feedback was that I was very kindly invited this morning to the Heads of Nursing meeting, and the purpose of that really was to kind of reintroduce myself and the governors as the Council of Governors to the heads of nursing, because I'm appreciating the fact we haven't been around on site for a long time. Some of the personnel have changed, so Krishna kindly gave me some time this morning at their meeting, and it was obviously very positive. It was lovely to meet people I hadn't met before, reacquaint myself with people that I did know, and if I may be permitted to quote Krishna, we are pushing against an open door in terms of getting governors back onto site. So I've talked about, is there anything else that I need to do as to let people, sort of at matron level, know about governors and what they do. Obviously, I don't know how many of you've seen it, but I have done the short video that's been put on the Facebook page, which talks about governor's role. I've done some written communication, which we're going to circulate. And it was mentioned today that it might be worth me going to some of the matrons' meetings or, engaging in some other way just to get people back to understand what governors do. But it is all part of the process of us, getting back to doing some visits on site. And we're going to, Ruth and myself are going to trial a visit on Monday next week with some amended paperwork, just to test the waters and see how things go. So just to let everybody know that, we are trying. They may seem like small steps, but we are trying to make those steps to get us re-engaged on the site. So, watch this space.
Well done. Thank you very much, Margaret. Mike.
Yeah, I'm the Governor's representative on the Urgent and Emergency Care Project Board. There hasn't been a meeting in the last 3 or 4 weeks, so I may not be up to date. But the actual build of the OECD and the Paediatric Assessment Unit are on schedule. There are a few issues. The North Corridor, which links the department, the Emergency Care Department, to diagnostic imaging, is a bit of a problem because of a recovery room needed for interventional radiology, but I think that's being addressed at the moment. There are a number of other minor issues, but the biggest risk is workforce, whether we'll be able to find the clinical workforce and others for the new department.
Thanks for that update, Mike. And we're going to have as I understand it, fabulous display at the annual members meeting where people will be able to kind of have a bit of a virtual tour. So I'm looking forward to that, and thank you for your hard work on that group. Pervez.
I've been long interested in reducing hospital mortality, and as a part of that process, I have met the quality group under leadership of Jane. I've also been to see Mr. Morris, who is the trust head of mortality. And next stage, I'm going to go to their monthly meeting to see if there is anything where I can help them or come up with ideas to reduce inpatient mortality.
Thank you for that update, Pervez, and thank you for your contribution to that very important agenda. Very grateful. So I think that concludes the Governor feedback, and thank you for your feedback. And then we're on to the next section, which is consent items. The only advance notice I've had is respect to the IPR, which we'll come to now, but I'm deeming all the other items agreed as per the recommendations. And then we'll come to the one item where I've had notice a Governor would like to raise issues, and that's on the IPR, and it's Mike. So any issues you want to raise, please, Mike.
Just a quickie. Those of you who've been governors and board members for a long time will know that one of my hobby horses is patient flow and bed occupancy. I haven't raised the issue for some time, but I've noticed that on the latest figures, the target bed occupancy seems to have crept up somewhat. A few years ago, the ideal bed occupancy in a hospital was considered to be 85%. Then it went up to 87%, and now it seems to be up to 92%. Can someone explain to me whether this increase is evidence-based?
That sounds like one for Kevin or Hal.
So I think the answer to that, Mike, is, and I can check whether this is right, that you're dead correct. 85% is still the optimum target for efficient operational flow and maximising safety and everything like that. But the target is set at 92 because we cannot possibly ever achieve that, and that is a best target that we can aim for. That is my understanding of that metric, but I can double check that for you. I mean, it's been a sad fact that for, I don't know, the last 10 years of my career, both in this hospital and in my last trust, that we never got down to 85%, and I think that's a reflection of that. But you're dead right, it still is the best, it's thought to be the best and most efficient level 85.
I think a few years ago we still managed 85% in the summer, admittedly not in the winter. But I mean, you know, is it just going to keep going up and up as our bed management becomes more difficult?
Well,
so
I
we
guess,
just move the goalposts.
Yeah, so that's the challenge of working in the future in the system, isn't it? Because a lot of our pressures are at the front end and the back end of the pathways, and to be sure we can move people out safely into the community and get them rehabilitated and properly cared for in the community, and being sure that we only see the patients that we need to see. So, I mean, that would be the aim, that we can get back to that for sure, wouldn't it? But it's going to require a lot of system working, not just in the hospital, I think.
Yeah, and you're quite right, of course.
You're
the other thing was
diligent pursuer of the Holy Grail.
But as I mentioned before, it would be very useful if we had a breakdown of bed occupancy, ideally by specialty, but that may not be practical, but at least by division, so that I would have thought the board would want to know if say, medicine was running at 99% bed occupancy, but surgical specialties were only running at 80%. I know that doesn't happen, but for example, so that, you know, that would imply that there are far too many surgical beds and far too few medical beds. And I'm not saying that's the case, but that was just an example. So I think we should know bed occupancy by division. I've made this point numerous times before.
Mike, and I think you framed it very elegantly today in saying that not only should you know, but non-executive directors should know, and you should be at liberty to hold us to account against that. So at the next revision to the IPR, we will incorporate that change.
Thank you.
So we need to make sure that that action is properly logged and it happens, and we will do that. So that then takes us past the consent items into items for information. So you can note the work programme, and I just need to check, are there any items of any other business? Speak now or forever hold your peace. No items of A or B. So a few reflections, please, on how we did today. Was it a good meeting? Are you more or less assured about how the hospital's running? Did you find it valuable and a good use of your time?
Yes to all of those. It was, I think we've had some.
Pro is looking for your ring device.
So we had some very interesting and informative discussions. So I think it's been a very good meeting indeed.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was.
Very good. I was conscious that you had quite a number of presentations, and there has been concern about presentations in the past, but I don't think they were kind of presentation information. They were more discussions supported by some slides. So as long as you're content that that's what we were doing, that will set my mind at ease on that matter. Any other comments about how we did today?
Yeah. I thought the auditor's report was very clearly presented. I have sat through some and it's just gone straight over my head. But I found that one. I'm not saying I understood it all. That would be far too much. But I think it was a very good presentation and just said enough.
Yeah, it was very, very clear. And of course, we were in the very luxurious position of having all those lovely assurances. So that was good. John.
Thank you. I thought it was a very good meeting, and I'm happy that we're actually getting responses back from non-executives on particular areas, so that it was interactive. And I look forward to that happening in the future.
Thank you, John. Norman?
Just to say, Helen, that I think that we're getting better presentations. We're getting more informative presentations from people that matter, from people that run the trust and make sure that the trust is on, we've got the right person at the helm. I'm encouraged, even though we've not been on site for so long, by the amount of information that we are getting as governors. And I do feel assured and reassured that we're going in the right direction. And a lot of the work that's being carried out, there's a good reflection of that today from everyone who's presented, that a lot of hard work, a lot of work going into making sure that the governors are on board, and that we're fully up to date. And I find that really, really good, that I'm not just being pushed aside and saying, this is what we're going to do, like it or not. You know, it's a fait accompli, but we are involved. We do get to say what we think is right and wrong, and I do think it's listened to. And that's why I am getting fed up of these type of meetings, but they're still very interesting and very good. So thank you.
And thank you for that feedback, Norman. Mike?
If Jane is still on the call, can we discuss second cataracts outside the meeting, please?
We shall leave you and Jane to be the last people to exit the call. Listen, thank you all very much. You might well be on your holidays between now and when I next see you, or at least be getting a bit of time to call your own. And if you are, I hope you really enjoy it and look forward to seeing you in September. Take care. Bye for now.